Okay,
All
so
right.
we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members. So Charlie, you are,
All right, well, let's start her up.
you got 8 now.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. My name is Charles Sindel. I'm chairperson of the Webster Groves Plan Commission. We are a 9-member board of citizens appointed by the city council to review development proposals and make recommendations to the city council regarding future development of the city. In addition to the members of the Plan Commission participating via teleconference, we have a few other representatives of the city I would like to introduce. Council member Pam Bliss, is she here? I don't know if she's.
See her on yet.
City Attorney Peter Brunschweiger, welcome Peter. Planning and Development Director Mara Perry. Is Danny here?
Danny is here in the council chambers.
I am here.
Hello, Danny. Planner Danny Gendusa and Denise Pileski, our recording secretary. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's monthly meeting of the commission and take this opportunity to explain how we operate. As indicated in our agenda, we will begin with the regular session of the meeting when we will hear new applications for rezoning or subdivisions. We will hear a staff report and the applicant will explain the proposal. We will then ask for comments from the public. At that time, anyone with an interest in the proposal may indicate to City Council they have a question or would like to express their opinion by clicking on the raise hand feature on Zoom. To make sure that we accurately record your name, we ask that you identify your full name and address at the beginning of your comment. When you make your comments, we ask that you be as concise as possible and not repeat a point made by a previous speaker. We also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. One person who is a spokesperson for an organization may have 6 minutes to comment. After all citizens have spoken, the applicant will be asked to respond to any questions that have been raised during the hearing. When we have finished reviewing one proposal, we will move on to the next application. Comments concerning items not on the agenda should be made during the public comment section of the agenda near the beginning of the meeting. When we have completed the regular session of the agenda, we will go into executive session. At that time, the commission will discuss the proposal and may decide to vote on the application or to postpone the decision. You are welcome to remain and listen to the discussion, but there'll be no further opportunity for public comment at that time. Our recommendations are sent to the city council. In most cases, the city council will conduct a similar hearing and must enact an ordinance before the proposal is finally approved. If the plan commission takes a vote tonight, the city council will likely take up this issue at the first meeting next month. If you want additional information regarding our vote or the progress of the application, you may contact staff at City Hall. And I would ask the acting secretary, Jeff, can you do that?
No,
I don't have the agenda in front of me.
I have the agenda on the shared screen.
And how do I get to that?
Are you seeing my screen?
No.
You're not?
Oh,
seeing
yeah, I see it. Okay, I got it. All right, I'll do the agenda. First item is approval of minutes. Is there any comment regarding the minutes of the last meeting? I don't hear any comments. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
A second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the December 13th, 2021 meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? All right, next item on the agenda, public comment. Is there any members of the public who would like to comment on matters that are not on tonight's agenda?
You have no members of the public.
All right, public hearings, 21 PC 11 Euclid Elms, an application by Robert Keeney on behalf of Onder Properties LLC to establish a planned environment unit procedure within the A4 7,500 square foot residence district on an approximately 1.09 acre tract of land located at the following addresses: 15 Euclid Avenue, 23 Euclid Avenue, 131 Euclid Avenue, and 133 Euclid Avenue. That has been a request to postpone that to February the 7th. Is there a need to vote on that, Mara?
I'd like a motion that you will postpone it to that date certain so that we do not have to advertise it in the paper again.
Do I have a motion?
Motion
So
to
moved.
postpone.
To fight amongst yourselves. It's been moved
Go ahead,
and I
Mike.
think seconded to postpone the 21 PC 11 to February 7th, 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll go on to the next item, which I can't see. Okay, I got it now. 21 PC 09 City Code Text Amendments, Tree Preservation and Landscape.
Charles, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I'm really sorry. Could we get the caption on?
Mike, I had asked Danny, he's up in council chambers, to see if he can get the button's not showing up on my screen right now.
the
So
buttons on? Okay,
Asked Danny to try to see if he could put the captioning on. Oh, he's got it.
there it is. There it is.
Okay,
I'm really
sorry about
sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
I texted him, but he probably didn't see me. He's upstairs in council chambers and I'm downstairs.
No, it's good. Thank you. I'm sorry, Charles.
No problem. All right, let's go again. 21 PC 09 City Code Text Amendments, Tree Preservation and Landscape Ordinance. Proposed amendments, including creating a new chapter 57 Tree Preservation and Landscape Requirements through the relocation and amendment of regulations in chapter 10 Public Ways and Places, sections 10.300 through 10.385. And Mara, are you going to be the presenter?
I am. I'm going to present this.
All
So
right.
just as a reminder, we've held this through a couple meetings so far. The first meeting, I talked to you just about kind of a general sense of what we were going to do and what the process was, in terms of the fact that right now the code is in chapter 10, which makes it very confusing for developers or someone working on private property, because the chapter 10 is public ways and places. So we were going to remove out and take everything out of chapter 10 that really needed to be in a tree and landscape ordinance that is for private property. And then we were going to amend everything that was in chapter 10. Chapter 10 doesn't have to go before the Plan Commission. So that section was pulled out on its own. And then everything that stays in a new chapter 57, which is what we were going to add in, that one goes before the Plan Commission and then goes before City Council for public hearings. I know it's a little confusing about that, but the legalities are things that are within the planning zoning realm go through public hearings before Plan Commission. Other code amendments, depending on where they are in the code section, do not go before you. And sometimes don't even have a hearing before City Council. But our plan is to have both these code sections, when they get to council, be reviewed simultaneously by the council. So our focus is on creating a new chapter 57. In your packets, I did give you a packet where I wanted to make sure that you still saw what we were doing with chapter 10, even though it's not before you. And then what we were doing with chapter 57. And I tried to give you both a red line, because it's really, really complicated with all the red line amendments we're making, as well as one where we accepted the changes. Now, do note, we've been trying to amend this probably for the last, 7-8 years, but we've had too many other sort of more important items that had come forward, and we really needed to get to this. So many of the comments and changes had been proposed over the last 7 years, 5 years, 4 years. So we integrated it all into one. I'm going to ask that we keep the hearing open past tonight to next month's meeting, only because we've also sent all of these amendments to the Public Works Department and to the Parks Department, so that both those directors, as well as Yvonne, our arborist, can look at it and make sure that everything that they had told us years ago still holds true. So tonight was going to be more to help answer questions, help explain in very brief, as brief as I can with a 33-page code amendment, the sections that we were looking at, and then be able to answer any questions, but hold it over for you to do another review to the next meeting. So I'm going to go through and kind of just go section by section. please stop me at any time if you have a question, because really all I'm trying to do is help you, guide you through what changes we've made. And then we do want to do another reread of the version that we call our white paper version, which means all the red lines have been accepted, to make sure we understand that we haven't caused any other problems or issues. So the first page of the document, we removed all the right-of-way sections, which you'll see kind of in the middle of the code. And we clarified some of the titles to the section and renumbered everything as a chapter 57. Definitions. There is a lot of definitions and there's a lot of problems with the definitions. Some of the definitions needed to be taken out completely and put into the actual code. You shouldn't have a code regulation in a definition, because many times when someone is going to the code and trying to understand what they're supposed to be doing, they don't necessarily know to go look for the definition to figure that out. In addition, we had some words that needed to be defined in the code, and we had some words that we realized the only place they were located in the entire code was in the definition section. So you were defining a word that didn't even exist in the code itself. So we kind of did that with a lot of different things. So you'll see some of our definitions have very detailed code changes, like adjusted diameter. We added some other things about the condition factor. We tried to clean up so all of the language was written in the same way. And then things like annual license. Annual license really needed to be in a section about a license, not being a definition that explained what that was. We needed a license section. Things like city right of way. We
Mara?
didn't need, yes.
Mara, on the definitions, yeah, I had a question with the license. Well, and actually just in general, I noticed some of those definitions, I guess I didn't see a whole lot in the code. And that's, I think, the only question I had. It seemed a lot, but I saw some reference to another manual in the definitions.
Yes, there is reference to a manual, the International Society of Arboriculture, and then there's a couple manuals that are referenced. We found with tree ordinances that we many times reference those manuals because those manuals get updated on a regular basis from other organizations. So many times we will reference those just so that we are always keeping up with whatever the current regulations are that the arborists need to have.
So I guess that will they play into what exactly tree and landscape manual, a manual that contains information necessary to perform work outlined in this chapter. That's the third party manual you're talking about. That's a
I'd have
third
to
party.
figure out where is that reference?
That's I guess under T in the definitions, tree and landscape manual.
Oh, so that actually probably needs to be, so again, we're going to find little things that probably needs to be taken out. There was a manual that was done in the ordinance prior to this ordinance, and it is available on the city's website. But I think we had determined, and hopefully Yvonne will be able to tell us this, I think we determined that that manual no longer needs to exist. So that's probably something that we need to look at and confirm, because I do not believe it's really supposed to just be outlined in the chapter. So I will look into that for removal of that.
Okay. Yeah, I banged around the website just a little bit. I wasn't having any luck finding it because, like I said, some of the things
It's all
I
in the
just didn't see
document
some of
center.
these apply a lot to like how to actually do a landscape plan and stuff. So I thought maybe that manual.
No, it's all in
cover
the
it.
document center. Everything related to trees is in the document center on the city's website.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. That was just specific definition. So I wanted to ask why you're doing that part.
Oh, no, that's good. I'd rather we kind of get some of the questions asked now, because they might be things that we have to check with Parks Department. Because some of these comments and edits and changes were related to comments that they brought to us. Then we tried to consolidate our comments, the Parks Department's comments, the Green Space Advisory Commission's comments, as well as the Public Works Department comments, all into these changes. So it's a lot of people, and they might not always agree with one another.
Mara,
Yes.
a question about the condition factor. You noted as a requirement. No, you can go back to your first one. Is there a definition for the condition factor?
So there was a definition for the condition factor, and it got moved into the adjusted diameter. So
Okay,
we actually just moved the whole definition of condition factor over to the adjusted diameter definition.
Okay, so what's shown in the red is actually what's being put in.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, as we move through, I'm not going to go through every single definition, but you will see that many times we crossed out ones that we had either removed from the section completely or moved to somewhere else. It was very hard to keep tracking. There are ways where you can track when you've moved something and it changes it to yet a third color or a different color. And we found that when we were trying to move it and then we were trying to format it properly, it would make it look brand new again. So that does make it a little bit confusing when we had condition factor in one place and then we took it out and moved it to another place. But it was the only way that we could figure out how to do it to make it as clean as possible, because it is a very, there's a lot of changes to the code. So we tried to change in the various definitions, different elements, things that should not be in the code in terms of a definition were taken out. Consistency, like Director of Parks and Recreation was under P for Parks and Recreation, and it was listed as Parks and Recreation Director instead of keeping all the titles having Director first. Green Space Advisory Commission had a whole little section that talked about what they were supposed to be doing instead of it was already repeated in another section of the code. When we got down into things like the word landscape permit needed to be defined in the code to help explain when you needed a landscape permit, not as a definition of landscape permit. So most of these, there's also some small little things where we tried to show where a limit of disturbance would be shown, or that numbers, trying to clarify numbers and clean up numbers in the code. And then when we got down to, so things like keeping right of way in some code section, but then removing it in other sections. And then in particular, when there were things like under tree specialist actually used to be a whole section under the definition of tree preservation plan, had so many code regulations in it. It included talking about who could do a tree preservation plan, and it was only in the definitions. It wasn't anywhere in the code. So we took, even though it looks like we're taking all of this section out, we actually moved it into its own code section in the code. So a lot of this, all of this here, limit of disturbance line, talking about tree replacement, talking about the tables and the tabulation, all of that was information that was critical for someone understanding how to do a tree preservation plan and should not have been in the definitions to begin with. Any other questions on definitions? I know I kind of went through, there were a lot of definitions, a lot of pages of definitions, but we tried to mainly clean those up. Okay, I'm going to move on, but if another question comes up, let me know. The next thing that we did is there were sections about what the duties were, both of the Green Space Advisory Commission as well as the various departments. And the confusing thing about the Green Space Advisory Commission is it actually gives almost too much power written in the code. They are simply an advisory commission. They're a commission of volunteers. They don't necessarily, the volunteers have an interest in green space. They aren't always professionals in some of the things like being an arborist. Now, sometimes they are, but that advisory commission changes at different points in time. Code amendments really are supposed to start with city council or staff, And policies are supposed to be determined by staff, not by volunteer committees. So we did take out that one of their sort of duties was to make amendments to the tree preservation ordinance, because they really can't do that, and also making policies, city policies. We left in some of the things that the volunteers typically do, which is continuing to educate people about our tree and landscape requirements, educating people and developing programs to help encourage landscaping. Now, we will still be able to talk with them and get feedback from them, but they are no longer sort of in charge of making amendments and policies. So we did take that out to kind of clarify that.
Mara, are they appointed or they just volunteer?
They're appointed by the council
Okay.
as volunteers. And there's not a, some of our boards and commissions say, like for the Architecture Review Board, it says you must be a licensed architect. Green Space Advisory does not say you need to be a horticulturalist, or you need to be a city or be an arborist, or a master gardener. It's a great mix. It's a fabulous group of volunteers, but they don't always have the technical expertise. So we did make sure this did go, because the code says now that it has to go before them. It was taken as a draft by our city arborist, who is, I believe, the staff liaison to Green Space, and did get feedback from them, which was given to us to integrate. I'm going to move on to other department head duties. Under the department head duties section, there is a section that talks about just in general what all the department heads do together, which is that we administer and enforce and carry out the provisions. We help periodically review, advise, or revise or amend the document, which I'm seeing again this reference to the tree and landscape manual. It used to be called the Tree and Landscape Manual, so I probably need to keep finding those references and fixing those references, that they're supposed to be amending this document, because this document contains the regulations. So I'm going to have to look, and I'm going to mark a couple things to make sure to look for that reference. After it goes through what our combined duties are, it then talks about specific duties for each of us. So there are the duties for Public Works to focus on right-of-way trees. There's duty of the Planning and Development Department to help take care of potential violations, order removal or abatement on private property, in addition to the shared duties. And then the Parks Director, they actually at one point had separated it into park manager duties and park department director duties. But really the code is meant to be that each of the department directors does assign their various staff to take care of things. So instead of breaking it out into what the park director does and the park manager, the director of Parks and Recreation and the park manager, we put it all under one section, just like we did for Public Works and for planning. In addition, there wasn't a reference to the Director of Finance and Administration having to issue annual licenses. So we wanted to make sure that that was in there too. So we did add that section. Going to licensing and registration, which ties back to the finance director. There is an annual license that's required, and there's a long list of all the people who know how to and are licensed to take down trees, to prune trees, to do maintenance on trees. But one of the things that actually wasn't in the code, but was required by our Parks Department and in their review of private tree preservation plans, is that there is a tree specialist that is registered that has to do a tree preservation plan, because that's very different than just a tree company that knows how to take the trees down. A tree specialist has an arborist who knows how to prepare a tree preservation plan. So we added that in. It's a one-time registration fee. We don't make them renew it annually, but as their plans come in and they're reviewed, if there's some concerns with how they are performing that, we'd be able to remove them off the list and ask them to provide us with a showing us that they can still perform the job of being able to do the tree preservation plans. So we made sure to clean that up and add that in, as well as looking at the Director of Finance making sure that we're issuing it based on other things that are in the code already of how we issue our licenses. This whole section, tree preservation plan, this is what was all in the definition. So we tried to pull all of that out, tried to identify what is in a tree preservation plan, when it's required, what the protective measures are. So we moved all those code requirements out of the definition section. We clarified when it was applicable. And then we did try to make sure, so when it's applicable, there was always a question where we were telling people that if they've owned the property for less than 12 months, they had to do a tree preservation plan. But that was only because it was in the prohibited acts later in the code. So people were kind of questioning how we could possibly require it when it was only in the prohibited act that they could potentially take a tree down illegally, that why should we have to do the tree preservation plan? So we wanted to identify up front, making sure the preservation plans were done if they hadn't owned the property for more than 12 months. That's to help protect trees, especially when it's someone who's just coming in to do a quick flip of the property and they really don't care about the trees because they're not going to live there. And we found that a lot of damage happens to neighboring trees when someone is just in trying to do a quick change, like renovate the property and then move on. And so making sure that that was defined in there was pretty important. We also wanted to make sure there was a tree permit waiver. What we found is that there are property owners that have owned the property less than 12 months. They plan to live here for the next 2 decades, but they are just in that early, they've just bought the house, they're trying to do work. They're not intending to touch any of the trees, and they're not going to be anywhere near any of those trees. So there is a waiver request where you don't have to pay for a full tree preservation plan, but you put up protection fencing and you're still protecting your property and your neighbors from getting damage, maybe when you're doing work on the property that's much less invasive and isn't, say, taking down a whole addition or tearing down a garage. So we wanted to make sure that was in there and clarified. In practice, we've been doing that. We've been giving people waivers, even though it really didn't clarify what the waiver was or how we could do a waiver. In addition,
Mara,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jeff. Could you go back? Could you, item D under, what's item 2 now, I guess, property owners that have owned the property for less than 12 months. So that is associated with, could you explain that a little bit? So
Sure, let's say
the
someone goes,
removal of a valued tree. Yeah, go ahead.
so let's say someone owns a property for less than a year and they come in to get a permit to demolish something, or they go in to do work on the property. If they're going to do work on the property, so we probably need to clarify that is owned it for less than 12 months and plan to pull a building permit to do work on the property.
Okay.
That will probably clarify it much better. Sorry, I'm gonna find that section and put a note for myself. Preservation applicability. Yeah, we probably need that clarification that they're gonna pull a building permit to do work.
Okay. And should there be an or after item A there, or is that?
There should be an or. Site plan approval or a demolition permit for removal of a primary, or building permit for the construction of a new primary, or a building permit for work on the property with property owners that have, we'll work on some language for that and bring that back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification question.
I just want a quick clarification on that too. So, so you're putting in a swimming pool, you need site plan approval, correct?
No, you don't need site plan approval. Site plan approval is for something that has a CUP, something that has a site plan that has to go before Planning Commission.
Okay, so they just need a survey, basically, a yard survey to do a pool.
Yes.
I mean, so I had a neighbor that put in a pool and they took down 3 huge trees. lived there less than a year, did it on a Saturday and a Sunday when there was no one there. So that when the inspectors came out, the trees were already gone. I, I don't know how you stop a situation like that, but
So that's where what we've been trying to do is that if they've owned the property for less than 12 months, it's now flagged in our plan review for our projects. Now we've had a few slip through that, because again, it's not in the code section right now. It just simply says you're in violation if you take down a tree that is a valued tree, if you've lived there for less than 12 months. So really it was just a violation if you did it and we caught you doing it. Whereas we have been trying to be more proactive and make them put a tree preservation plan in place when they go to pull any kind of permit. And now we're even saying, if you're pulling a permit for interior work and you're going to have a dumpster on the site, even with just interior and a dumpster on the site, we are making sure they either have a tree preservation permit or a tree waiver.
okay. So do you look at aerials for, like I said, for exterior work like that?
Well, it's really that we're just saying you have to have a tree permit, period. Now, again, I say that if someone moves in and doesn't go to pull a permit and they just go out and tear down some trees on a weekend and we can't see it, or we don't see it, or no one, I'm not sure there's a way we can catch something like that unless a neighbor calls it in.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And then we've also found the other little way that people have been doing it is some of the developers now know that if someone's lived there for a certain period of time, they're asking the seller to take the trees down before they buy the property. So that the person who's lived there for 30 years takes the trees down, and then the new buyer buys it so that they don't have to worry about the trees, and they aren't required to put a tree preservation plan in place.
Yep. Not a whole lot to stop that, I guess, but
No,
okay.
there's
So, yeah.
not much to do about
So-
that.
So what is the intent of the 1 year? To provide some level of accountability without completely tying property owners' hands?
Correct. It's supposed to provide some level of accountability, in particular for those that are not planning to continue to live there. So trying to make sure that the developer that comes in to just, try to quickly get some interior work done, puts a big dumpster on the driveway, but then starts piling up all their materials behind that on top of a tree root system of some, gorgeous 30-inch caliper tree that's on the property line, that we would have some sort of protection for that root zone to keep them from getting into that area, and hopefully to protect trees along the property lines or within the property from being damaged during that work.
Okay.
Any other questions on the less than 12 months or the waiver? Okay. We've also tried to clarify a little bit more about tree protection and replacement. Again, some of these sections were in different places. We tried to put them all in one section to kind of clarify what the valued trees are, what you have to protect on larger lots, what you need to be able to do for a replacement, because a lot of times there's questions about how many trees can be replaced. And then if there isn't sufficient site space on the site of a lot, what they pay into the tree fund when they can't continue to plant back, the amount of caliper inches required once they take things off the lot. For those that don't know the basics, I'm going to really quickly go through the basics of a tree preservation plan. If someone has a tree preservation plan and they have said, we are going to take down 3 trees, and the actual caliper inches of those trees might be 30 inches, but based on the species of the tree, the size of the tree and the condition of the tree, they might only be required to plant 10 inches back. and let's just say they have a really small lot, those 10 inches, maybe they can really only plant 2 trees, because each of those trees really shouldn't be more than a 2 to 2.5 inch caliper. So they're planting back 5 inches, but they can't plant that last 5 inches back. They have no room on their lot. Once you plant a tree, you want to think about the room that it has to grow. So if they have 5 more inches still to plant, if they can't do that, they will pay $120 per inch. And then that gets capped off on a residential lot at $800. That money goes into a tree fund, and that tree fund pays for trees that are replacement, either street trees, public trees in parks, places in right of way. So all of those different areas, the tree fund can pay for the replacement of those for the, the pleasure of the general city. And then it encourages still that trees can get planted back on the site. So we tried to clarify that in this replacement regulation section to make it a little easier to read. I'm going to go on to landscape plan, unless someone else has questions about tree preservation and replacement.
I have a question. Mara, can you hear me?
Yep.
Do we have anything in place as it relates to just like the main street replacements? So like, are they required to have like the same kind of, those like the crates below? Like, is there anything in design guidelines for like consistency? And I'm thinking mainly just in like Old Webster or the more denser walkable areas. Is there already something in place for that, or
So
do you try to?
That's in the right of way code section. So
Okay.
that's not going to be in this. This is just for private property. Because, but now I say that in single family residential, they're required to put in 1 street tree or replace back 1 street tree. But that street tree has to come from a very specific list. And that's going into, a front lawn.
Okay.
When it comes to ones in Old Webster, so for example, Old Webster, well, there's none in Old Orchard because it's on Big Bend, but those are done through the Parks Department and through the city. So the city determines the species, determines if they are having, problems with the condition, determines when to replant them. They do try to use silvocels. I know they've been talking about using them when they could, but you can only put those in place if you're going to be tearing up all the sidewalk. So at this point in time, we don't have any projects that are going to be tearing up all those sidewalks and having the room to put that in. But when we do, so for example, when we were putting the code together for Douglas Hill, we had identified that we wanted to have them, encourage them to use either some sort of underground area that would encourage the root system to be able to grow underneath. And it's not necessarily silvocels, but that type of thing.
I was going to ask about that. Thanks.
So landscape plans. Landscape plans are very confusing because many people don't understand that we don't require landscape plans for very many projects. We don't require them for single family homes. We don't require landscape plans when someone's doing an addition on their property. We're really trying to focus on, are you doing commercial property? Are you constructing a parking lot? That's really where we need the landscape plans. Are you doing a really big addition at a school? Are you doing a large addition at a university? Those are the reasons why we would need it. A planned commercial, planned multifamily, conditional use permit, using a parking lot. So we don't get landscape plans in very often because we don't have big new parking lots going in. We don't have really big new construction going in. But when we do have it going in, we needed to make sure that people understood when it was applicable and that people understood what we needed on that landscape plan. So we did try to clarify the landscape plan content, what we needed, what we wanted to make sure we understood was on there. So sometimes they wouldn't show us the sign location or where light fixtures were going to go. And so we would tell them to put a tree there, but then later they would come back and say, well, we need a light there. So now we can't put a tree there. And if we don't have all of that information, it's hard for us to review the landscape plan. The landscape plan includes some tabulations. It can also include an overlap with the tree preservation plan, especially if they're protecting certain trees, and they can count towards landscaping. So we tried to make sure that that was clarified in terms of what the content was. Then going into landscape design standards. This is a pretty extensive thing that covers, again, what would be in landscape plans, but sometimes covers smaller projects that might need to update things that maybe it wasn't required, like a conditional use permit, we can put additional regulations in. Sometimes we'll ask them to put in things that would be landscape design standards as a extra regulation because it wasn't going to be applicable to the project that they were doing. So sometimes we might ask them to put in an additional street tree or to do some additional buffering that are in the landscape design standards that might not have been applicable. So under the landscape design standards, there was a lot of information, but we tried to figure out where that overlap of preserved existing landscaping was with trees. And then we wanted to clarify buffering. So we went through and talked a lot about what happened with existing landscaping, where interference, that we don't want to interfere with other things that are happening with utilities, what some of our acceptable tree species were. So there's a bunch of general regulations that were in some strange sections that we wanted to put up in the general landscape content regulations. And then we wanted to clarify things like buffering requirements of when a buffering requirement was applicable. A lot of times people would say to me, well, but that's a residential property, but it might be a residential house in a commercially zoned property. So trying to clarify some of those elements, not how it was used, but how it was zoned, trying to make sure whether it needed a landscape plan. Also, we were having a lot of problems with the clarification of when sod was required. A lot of people were like, well, I can just seed and straw this. Well, if you seed and straw in February, you are probably not going to get it to grow, and then we're going to have problems with mud and other things in the street. So trying to really clarify that you can only do seed and straw when you have some timing that it could grow, or, but in general, they're supposed to be putting sod down. So we tried to clarify that in our code. There were other sections. They were pretty minor in some of the changes, so I didn't continue. I didn't post all the pages. You'll see it kind of jump from page 22 to page 27 because we weren't doing a lot of major changes within some of those requirements. Going to surety requirements, trying to make sure we clarified. You'll see up here, there used to be a $2,000 for single family residential development, and that surety was not helping because in the other code section, it said you couldn't fine them for more than $800. So trying to make sure that those tied together, and that was a change that was made by the city council the last time this ordinance was amended. So we tried to fix that and tried to clarify that a little bit, and also trying to clarify in the landscape section, the landscape plan currently says that you have to put down an escrow or deposit that equals 125% of the cost of all materials and labor. And that was supposed to be put in place basically to say, well, if all of your plants die in the first 2 years, that the city can use that money to go back and replant it if you don't go back and replant it. Well, even if someone puts everything in and we have a very dry year and they don't maintain it, you're never going to lose 100% of all the plants that are there because it rains. And so it was becoming a really large burden because we were keeping that for 2 years. So a development that maybe was paying $50,000 to $100,000 on landscaping was having to put a deposit of $125,000 down with us for 2 years just to ensure that the landscaping didn't die. So we were thinking that we would probably reduce that to more like 50%, so that we do still have an escrow, still keeps them making sure that they maintain it, because once they've maintained it for the first 2 years, the trees and other landscaping are very likely to be able to have taken well, and will be able to continue to grow properly, even with lower level of maintenance. We also wanted to make sure that the tree and landscape requirement had a little bit of clarification for the 2-year period, for holding the landscape plan and holding the tree preservation plan. And this is where the prohibited acts came into play. There was a whole series of exemptions about residential property. And then there was a definition that didn't completely, it was just called Clearcut. And Clearcut didn't completely cover what it meant when someone just took down a couple trees on a site. So we did try to clarify that Clearcut is a site occupied or vacant that has not been continuously occupied by the owner for at least 12 months as the principal place of residence, and which does not have an approved tree permit. So a resident that's lived there for more than a year right now could cut down every tree on their lot should they wish to do that. It also has, if you've lived there for more than a year, you don't need to have a tree permit to cut down a tree. But if you've lived there for less than a year, you have to have a tree permit if you want to take any trees down. And you have to have that tree permit. And it's either if the property is vacant, occupied, or is just a general site. The rest of the prohibited acts, almost all of them were related to the right of way. So we took all those prohibited acts out of this section and left them all in the right of way code. So you'll see it kind of comes down to the clear cut and removal of valued trees, and then pruning of trees. So those are really, in some ways, A and B, as we kept rereading it, really kind of are duplicative. We're going to probably look at trying to clarify that down to even just one, and making sure that it doesn't look like two. We might leave it as two because some people might look at the word clear cut and then jump down. And so we might try to keep it in two sections. And this is pretty much the last but not least. We didn't have an appeals section in one place like we normally do at the end of an ordinance. So we wanted to make sure there was an appeal to the Board of Adjustment if they have a problem with our decision or determination related back to any section of this code. And it's really under the appeals section that they think we've interpreted the code wrong. It's not an appeal like they're saying that it's a hardship. So it's really tied directly to they think we've interpreted the code incorrectly. That's mainly what we get when people are disagreeing with what we've said in the code. And that takes you through pretty much, again, trying not to go every little line item, but I wanted you to be able to understand what we were trying to do so that hopefully, and you've already given me a few key ones that I had not noticed, help us understand if you think that there's some places that are not clear. We're also going to make sure to get comments from Parks, Public Works, the city arborist. And then what we'd like to do is bring you another red line with other potential changes to the next meeting in February.
Mara, I just want to point out to everybody that they can email you if they've got something they notice.
Yes.
Between meetings, there's no prohibition with them contacting you.
Yes.
So I encourage everybody to do that if they notice something, have questions about something. Anybody have any questions at this time? Is there a motion to keep the hearing open to the February 7th meeting?
I move.
Yes.
Second.
It's moved twice, so I think that counts as a second.
I think Steve moved it and Jeff seconded it.
To continue 21 PC 09 to the, leave the hearing open and continue it to the February 7th, 2022 meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? I don't hear anyone. So we can move on. There's no executive session. I think we're going to go to, what's that section? Other business.
Other business. So I apologize that Euclid Elms was postponed, but the developer's working on some more clarifications. So we'll have a pretty extensive report for you for next month. I had told you that the PEU was a little bit more complicated because it's an overlay to an existing district. But we'll try to make sure we provide enough information to you for that one. I do not think we're going to get anything else new other than that, and continuing the code amendment for the February meeting. I would hope that there might be a chance we might be getting something in March, but at this time we're a little slow, which is going to be helpful since I won't have Danny.
So Danny, where are you going? Crestwood?
Oh yeah, I'm going to Crestwood to be the planner at Crestwood.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Right.
Oh,
We're all
Danny,
gonna
we're
go
gonna
out
miss
and have a
you.
drink tonight, Danny, just by ourselves.
Sounds appropriate.
We're gonna miss you, man.
Yeah, Danny.
Thanks for
Thanks,
everything, Danny.
everyone. I've really enjoyed working with you all the past few years, and everything I know about planning I've learned from Mara. So yeah, it'll be a hard step, but I'm excited to take a new step.
Get something put on Crestwood Mall sign.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
No pressure.
I think they're close.
You make him closer, Danny.
Maybe Crestwood Hill.
Oh, God.
Yeah, this is your last chance to dump on Danny.
Yeah.
Good luck, Danny.
Douglas Wood.
Douglas Wood.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, gosh.
You got any other business?
Mara, it's most likely that I just lost it or overlooked it, but I don't recall seeing a packet. I searched my email here
Oh,
during the meeting. So again, it's probably my fault, but if you could check that I didn't get dropped from the list inadvertently.
yeah, I'll check to
appreciate
make
it.
sure. I think I'm the one who sent it out. And then did you get the other emails that kept saying things like, oh, shoot, we put the wrong time on the agenda? Did you get any of those?
Yeah, I got a
that
couple
one,
today.
but I didn't get the original.
So I replied all to the original. I'll try to figure out why you didn't get that one. I'll figure it out. But yeah,
Okay.
you have not been dropped off the list. You are on my list. You're not getting off anytime soon.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion. It's
Move
Mike.
to-
Been moving a second to adjourn, and so we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks
All
all.
right.
Danny, good luck, man.
Bye, Danny.
Bye,
All
Danny.
right,
Bye,
thank you.
Danny.
Thanks.
Good
See you
night,
at Crestwood
everybody.
Mall.